When I was reading about the scientific worldview in Ford's The Search for Meaning, there was one part of the section that mentioned the word scientism. I was very interested in finding out what exactly scientism was, so naturally I googled it on the internet. After scrolling through a couple of pages, I decided to read an article about a documentary about scientism based on the opinions of C.S. Lewis. This film is called The Magician's Twin. This brought questions into my head such as how are these two things, magic and science, related to each other? Scientism results from, as Lewis sees it, relying too significantly on the scientific worldview. Since the scientific worldview remains firmly and inescapably in this world, there is no need to factor in other parts of the mythic and philosophic worldviews that have a transcending world separate from us. One of the major points in Ford's explanation of the scientific worldview is that everything has a primary and secondary characteristics. Forms are instead defined as descriptions of things, such as a person being tall or short. These qualities all exist in nature and are usually measurable and visible to the eyes. As a result, life's meaning seems to become focused on furthering science since everything can be explained and sensed by us, like using our senses. This results in the beginning of scientism, in which people become too corrupted by power and attempt to control the world with science and scientific politics. Most of everything can be changed by scientific procedures. It explains how things happen and predicts when they will happen again. Everyone must believe in a law of science because it is a truth. Science leads to scientism when the effectiveness of a procedure becomes this truth. If a deadly disease can cure our loved ones, we will naturally rely on science to save them. We attempt to take control of their lives and mold them with our own hands. It becomes, as Ford states, the only path. C.S. Lewis is stated to have feared scientism, which he was correct to do. When we look at the world today, technology runs the world. Teens can't get off their phones, and we are now able to cure genetic diseases by having 3 parents, where a child is genetically modified when it is an embryo, with the healthy parent's genes being injected into it. He feared that this power to alter human beings would lead to an obsession with controlling everything in nature. The documentary mentions novels that focus on the danger of scientism, such as George Orwell's 1984. When this was mentioned, I had several thoughts about this and how it relates to the mythic worldview. Are the scientific and mythic worldviews interconnected, where the leaders are in the scientific worldview and the ones below that they control and lead to believe that science is good and natural in the mythic worldview? This is how in Orwell's novel, where you have the top people such as O'Brien controlling the lower people, as in the citizens that live in the book, such as Winston and Julia. When Winston begins to object to society that he lives in and questions it, is he beginning to enter the philosophic worldview? There are so many connections between these worldviews, it is probably easy to break out of and switch between 2 of them. The documentary states that Lewis found 3 different ways in which these 2 different subjects, magic and science, are related to each other. That is, they both can function as a religion, encourage a lack of skepticism, and they are both transformed and utilized as a power. Both follow the principle that there is something higher than ourselves, force people to believe anything science, or for the magician, magic related, and can be used as a power to control the world and things around us. Both the documentary and the section in the book mention how we can use science to alter our bodies to look different or to function differently. But the range of science ends here. As Ford states, science can give you larger breasts or a smaller stomach, but it cannot tell you whether it is better to be all natural. For example, one stated in the documentary, Hitler tried to alter people to have blonde hair and blue eyes. He himself determined this to be the best. But how did science tell him that these characteristics were the best? Science only told him how to change people. Science led to dictatorship because it made people feel as though they had the power to control everything. But by being able to alter people to have the exact same shape, are we saying that everybody is the same? Why is there a right to rule based on the amount of your scientific knowledge? Why do people feel the need to change themselves to look like the rest of society? Are we getting rid of the supposed uniqueness that we all have? Just remember, you're unique, just like everybody else. What tells scientists that they have reached their limits? Will they be able to control themselves? I personally do not believe so. There will always be somebody that abuses their own power and is swallowed by this greed to be all-knowing about the universe. Another thing that was brought up both in the novel and the film about the subject of uniqueness was Darwin's theory of evolution. Both Ford and C.S. Lewis agree that by stating that everybody developed from earlier life forms, humankind loses its sense of uniqueness. Lewis expands on this by bringing up the point that evolution was blind and unguided. If we developed from simpler animals, how can we know that we are advanced creatures? How did single-celled organisms without minds develop into multi-celled organisms with minds? What is a mind? Before I watched this documentary, I had always believed in evolution as how we came to be. I felt as though I was stuck between choices and had to pick one. These choices were that we were created by a god or by science. Now that I see both beginnings have their faults, I don't know what to think. Another thing that I might have taken for granted was my knowledge about things animals might not know of. Am I really a sophisticated being, or am I really above all other organisms? I no longer believe so. As a result, I believe the scientific worldview has a great weakness in not taking into account things such as race, morals, cultures, and etc. It's the same way with animals. They sort of have their own traditions and cultures that they follow. I agree with the fact that in today's society, science might be going too far. We don't need holograms to take people's jobs, and while using science to cure diseases and such is good, we should never create a perfect human being because it will lead to more overpopulation and the risk of a dystopian society like the one in 1984. We need meaning in our own experiences and beliefs to factor into the scientific world. Thus we need the postmodern world.